Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. We're back again with more King Arthur, Knight's Tale, and this time I want to go over the Faerie Knight. You will automatically get the option of picking this guy up as part of the main story, and if you do, you're going to see he has really an incredible kit and makes a really nice addition to your team. First, let's go over the traits. He's got fast metabolism. After missions, he regains 20% of his maximum vitality, which really makes him sturdy. And even if things go bad, it makes it easier to just put him right back into the next mission and let him naturally heal himself. Awesome stuff. And then he also has Sacrificer. While appointed as Master of Magic in the Enchanted Tower, he's going to grant an additional 2 loyalty for every Old Faith hero. So it's going to make it really easy for you to max out all your Old Faith heroes if that's the type of play style that you're doing. Really cool stuff. Now let's go ahead and get into his abilities, which a lot of them honestly are different from what we've seen before. He's got Lightning Strike, deals 75% weapon damage to an adjacent enemy. So essentially, even though he does this as a melee attack, it strikes lightning on the enemy that's next to him. Great stuff. He's got an additional 15% weapon damage for Lightning Strike. He can shock the enemy for 1 turn, which I remember correctly, shock reduces their AP. And Lightning Strike's weapon damage is increased by 20% if the target has armor. And finally, the Lightning Strike's AP cost is reduced by 1, which means his natural melee attack costs 3 AP as opposed to the 4 AP that most of the other characters have to spend. Really great stuff all the way around. I recommend you get all of these upgrades. Maybe not Shock. It depends on how you play him. I feel like I would use him to take out a lot of the enemies that are in the back line and susceptible to melee attacks. But if you wanted to have them go up against some of the harder enemies, it might be worth having Shock because they're not going to go down in 1 turn. Next up is Blood Hex. Target starts bleeding and deals 30% less damage for 2 turns. If the target is bleeding, they suffer 25% damage at the start of their turn and after every action. You can upgrade it where the target will get physical debuff resist reduced by 30%. The cooldown is reduced by 1. The hex intensity for Blood Hex will be increased by 50%. So hex intensity means different things for different hexes. You always know what's increasing because the text will be in pink. So you can see here that the Blood Hex, what can be intensified is the 30% less damage for 2 turns. So you can increase this by 50%. So that means what? The target would deal 45% less damage for 2 turns. I would definitely say you want to go ahead and pick that up. And then Blood Hex's duration is increased by 1 instead. Now, mind you, I say pick it up because later on he does have Master of Hexes. And if you've watched my Sir Ectum video, then you kind of know how that works with the different hexes that he's going to get. But there's a lot of options here for different play styles. So kind of watch it, look at the abilities, and you can get a feel for how you would play him. So I'm just saying pick it up because I know this is a good ability, but it's a good ability in a certain play style where you combine it with certain things where you'll take full advantage of it. But how you do that is kind of up to you. I think it'll probably be clear once we get down to the bottom and we can kind of go back through them again. Next up, he has Teleport. Absolutely fantastic ability. It's going to teleport the target to a specific position within a range of 8 tiles. You can upgrade it where it costs 1 less AP, which means it's only going to cost 1 AP. The hero is healed by 2 HP every time you cast Teleport. You should be casting Teleport all the time, so this is absolutely a fantastic upgrade. The hero arrives at the target tile hidden after using Teleport, so this is a great way to be more defensive. You can help ensure that enemies will not attack you by going to a square where you'll have the option of being hidden. And then finally, you can increase the range by 2 for how far you can teleport. Teleport is amazing. Get this. And you probably want to go ahead and pick up all of the upgrades. Next up is magical armor. At the start of every encounter, gain 17 armor that will only protect the hero from the first attack. As far as upgrades, you can make the armor give you 6 more armor. You can give yourself an injury token. Magical armor can last for an additional attack, and your armor will be increased by 2, specifically this enchanted armor. I think this is worth picking up. Again, he has to be in, or preferably he's in melee range, so you're going to be bouncing around to a bunch of different places, and sometimes things just go bad. And it's nice that it's automatically on at the start of the encounter, so you don't have to manually trigger it. So if things go bad unexpectedly, you know he'll at least be able to handle some of it. And keep in mind that he's going to be wearing light armor unless you give him the upgrade for medium armor. So that even more so confirms you want to have some defensive capabilities on him. Next up is extra damage. The hero deals 10% more weapon damage. I don't think there's anything to talk about. You definitely want to get this. The hero can also wear medium armor. Whether or not you get this is up to you. Because he's going to be in medium range, in melee range all the time, could be really nice having him use medium armor. But the disadvantage of that is that it's not going to give, or more than likely, it's not, the armor you find is not going to give him increases to the skills that he has, because these skills are associated with people who use light armor. So you can give him medium armor, but then he's going to get all of the armor that helps with Vanguard skills, hiding, surprise attack, things of that nature. That's not stuff he can trigger on a regular basis. Whereas if you stick with light armor, you're going to get the Sage armor, which is going to do a much better job of helping him increase all of the things he has. So you're kind of sacrificing your utility and the increases and boost you can get for your powers in exchange for more protection. Up to you whether or not it's worth it. Next up is potion effects on the hero are increased by 50%. Most of the time I'm using potions to give me back health or armor, and the natural way that it starts without this Master Alchemist increase, in my experience, has been more than enough to make up for whatever damage I take. So if that's the way you plan to use them, I would say this isn't worth it. However, there are other powers that will give him more AP, more damage, things of that nature. And so if you decide you just want to go all in on damage, and if he gets hit, well, we'll just deal with it, then it might be worth taking this to give him the ability to just really, really light somebody up. Next up is slowing hex. The target is slow for 2 turns. Movement costs 100% more AP. You can upgrade this where the AP cost is reduced by 1, meaning it's only going to cost 1 skill point to use this hex. Make a target 10% more vulnerable. And slowing hex now affects every unit in an area of 3x3 tiles, but its hex intensity is reduced by 40%. Now, on the one hand, you might say, well, that's not worth it. I put slow on people because I want them to be slowed down. But because there's going to be a lot more people who are hexed overall, if you make this upgrade, it might be worth it. We'll talk about that more when we get over to Master of Hexes. And then finally, the duration is increased by 1 turn. So I definitely recommend you go ahead and get this. And you might want to go ahead and get the increase of 3x3 tiles. Whether or not you want all of the upgrade, and you definitely want Richcraft so that you can reduce the AP cost. But the 10% vulnerability and the duration, you might want this, you might not. Let's talk about it in a bit. Next up is Force Bolt. So he has a ranged attack and he has a melee attack. It's going to do 100% weapon damage and knock back the target. You can also upgrade it where it's going to gain 10% armor breaking. It's going to do an increase of 20% weapon damage against hexed units. Force Bolt can fire 3 missiles instead of 1, but each one deals only 34% weapon damage. And the hero gains 1 AP when killing an enemy with Force Bolt. I would say you want to pick up all of this. You can absolutely kill an enemy with this, so picking up that mind game where you get 1 AP is worth it. And it's worth splitting it up into 3 because there are a lot of enemies that have that buff where they automatically absorb the first 3 attacks you do against them. So by splitting this up into 3 missiles, you can wipe that entire buff off of them in just 1 turn, which is really, really awesome. So definitely pick this up. You definitely want all of the upgrades. All right, now, Master of Hexes. It's going to increase the hex intensity of all your hexes by 25%. Then it's going to give you an additional 10% hex intensity. And then enemies affected by any hex have their armor reduced by 2. The AP cost of hexes is reduced by 1. And then finally, the hero's weapon damage is increased by 5% for every active hex. That can really, really stack up to huge numbers because, again, remember, these hexes are very, very low cost. The blood hex is only going to cost, the blood hex is going to cost you 4 AP, 3 with the Master of Hexes upgrade, and then slow is going to cost you 1 AP. Or I'm not sure if you take this and you take the upgrade that reduces hex cost, if you can actually reduce it down to 0 AP. That might be possible. But regardless, they're very, very low cost. So it's easy to light up a battlefield where you have 2 or 3 people that are slowed and then an additional person that has a blood hex, bringing your overall weapon damage boost to 20%. That can be really, really crazy in the right situation. So because of that, it makes sense to pick up these hexes. But I say I'm not really sure if you want to bother putting the points into making the hexes themselves more powerful, because what really, really helps you is just having the hex on the person in general. It's not the hex in and of itself, unless you decide you want to build him as a hex master, which you can kind of do, but I think he's missing one of the major hexes that Sir Ectum gets. Right, so Sir Ectum has this death hex. So he's got 3 hexes that he can work with and throw out all the time, and therefore Master of Hexes kind of really works for him. Whereas with the Faerie Knight, you're only going to get 2 hexes. So I think it's a little bit more questionable whether or not building him up as a full hex master really makes sense. I think it makes sense to just say, okay, I'm going to go with this Master of Hexes. I'm going to get that weapon damage boost when I hex an enemy, and then I'm just going to use it for that and save the rest of my points to fill out some of these other things that I really, really want. Up to you, depending upon your play style. Next up, an ability I haven't seen on anybody else, Ice Shield. 3 ice plates start orbiting the hero for 3 turns for the duration. Each ice plate can fully negate 1 incoming hit. So this is what we were talking about before. Some enemies have the ability to go ahead and just negate 3 hits as a buff, and he gets the ability to do that just like his peers would. As far as upgrades, you can reduce the cooldown by 1 turn. You can increase the duration by 1 turn. You could create 1 additional plate so you can negate the first 4 hits against you as opposed to just 3. And finally, the AP cost is reduced by 1, bringing the AP cost down to 1. So that means if you pick this up and its upgrades, you can negate the first 4 hits, and then the 5th hit that actually got through to you would also have to pierce through the 17 armor that you start every encounter with, making him extremely defensive. And I think arguably he's better at teleporting to the back line and taking out enemy units than even Lady Guinevere is, because he's just much more defensive and able to really take those hits or those bad times in comparison to her. Just great, great stuff. Long range of non-melee active skills is increased by 1 tile, and you get a +1 to spellcraft. So spellcraft is going to allow you to uncover hidden objects or chests, and it allows you to identify shrines, which can have negative and positive effects when you use them. So it's definitely important that you have somebody who has spellcraft, and you probably want to get them to the point they have at least around a 3 in spellcraft. You can do that through a combination of ability and gear, or if you uncover enough chests, you're going to get a potion that will increase a character's spellcraft by 2. So you could also use that to try and ensure you have enough spellcraft for everything you want to do. But regardless, I would say you want to go ahead and pick this up so that you can use your hexes from further away. And I think it might also increase your teleport. I can't be sure about that. But yeah, definitely, regardless, you want to go ahead and get this. Next up is dodge. It's going to increase your dodge by 15%. You can kind of make a decision about whether or not you want to do this. In my opinion, considering you're negating the first 4 hits and you have 17 armor for that 5th hit, you don't really need to add yet another defensive power onto your kit. But if you decided you wanted to, it's there and available for you. Quick note before we get into the 3rd tier. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate you hitting the like button. This information helps me understand what kind of content my channel is enjoying, and it helps my videos spread to more people. I really appreciate all of the support. Okay, so now we're on the last tier. First up is Fire Blast. Deals 70% weapon damage to every unit in an area of 3x3 tiles. You can upgrade it where Fire Blast ignites the ground for 2 turns. Any unit that moves in this area suffers 20% weapon damage for each tile traversed. It can cause burning for 2 turns, which means the enemy is going to suffer 20% damage at the start of their turn. The Fire Blast can deal 50% weapon damage to its center. And finally, you can reduce the AP cost of Fire Blast by 1. So obviously this can be really nice in the right situation where you've got a bunch of enemies grouped up together. And since it's at a distance, it gives him even more versatility. So he doesn't have to teleport to enemies and use Lightning Strike if he doesn't want to. Unfortunately, he doesn't get anything like Merlin or Sir Ectum as far as increasing the amount of damage he does with fire. So he's really not as effective with it as some of the other characters who have this skill. You can kind of make a decision for yourself whether or not it fits into your playstyle. Me personally, I would probably ignore it. I would probably focus on teleporting to the back line and just manually taking out those backline units. But if you prefer to make him more of a spellcaster, especially if you're depending more on hexes, then maybe keeping him in the back and letting him just dish out damage from range makes more sense for you. Next up is melee expertise. While outnumbered, the hero gains 1 unbreakable armor and 5 mental debuff resist and physical debuff resist for each adjacent enemy. As far as upgrades, when killing a unit, the hero automatically attacks another adjacent enemy with a free strike skill. Definitely recommend that you go ahead and pick this up, even if you try to keep him out of the way. When he's finished killing all the backline or enemies to the side, more than likely you're going to have him head to the tank or the melee units who have been drawing all of the aggro. And so this still could come up. And just in general, I feel like anybody who's in melee range and they have the ability to go ahead and get this, I feel like they should. There's just so many times where you're going to kill an enemy and there's an enemy that's right next to you and just asking for another slash. So definitely go ahead and do this. The other ones, I'm not all that hot on. You can gain 5% weapon damage for each adjacent enemy. You should not be allowing him to get overrun. He's not really built for that. The hero starts the turn with 1 AP for each adjacent enemy above 2. Again, he shouldn't have that enemy any enemies around him. And all cooldowns are reduced by 1 turn if the hero starts their turn outnumbered. This can be triggered, and it's nice to get that free cooldown reduction. But again, there shouldn't be that many times where he's outnumbered. That's really towards the end of the fight when you're doing mop-up work. So me personally, I would say this isn't worth it. But these two, definitely, I would say you might as well go ahead and pick them up. Next up is spell resistance. You can take 25% less damage from incoming spells. As far as upgrades, you can get immunity to burning effects, an additional 10% less damage from incoming spells, 15% mental debuff resist, and fully negate the effects of the first incoming spell in each encounter. Now, again, I like using him to jump to the back line with teleport to take out the backline units. Sometimes the backline unit you want to take out the most is a spellcaster. And if you can't defeat them in the first turn, you're going to have to deal with whatever they can do when their turn comes up. So I think there's a case to be made for picking up spell resistance and then picking up Ancient Ward so that you can negate the effects of that first incoming spell. Keep in mind that Ice Shield, I haven't used this person yet, but I'm going to make an assumption that it works for him the same way it works for his peers. It will negate melee attacks, ranged attacks, and spells that directly target a person, such as Force Bolt. It will not negate an area of effect spell, such as Fire Blast or Merlin's Drake spell. So consequently, even if you have this on, if it's a spellcaster who's attacking you, depending on what they do, they might still be able to damage you through your Ice Shield and through your magical armor. So that being the case, I feel like it might be worth your time to go ahead and pick up this upgrade. But again, it all depends on how you use him, whether or not he be in a position where a spellcaster would really be targeting him, so you can make a decision about whether or not it's worth it. Here comes another ability that I don't think I've seen on anybody else. Force Cleave deals 100% weapon damage and causes knockback to every unit in a 3-tile wide area. If I remember correctly, regular Cleave only does 75%. Yeah, it does 75% to every enemy in the area. So this one is definitely different and more powerful. As far as upgrades, you can get an additional 10% weapon damage. It can cause 20% vulnerability. You can reduce the cooldown by a turn. So actually that makes the cooldown 1 turn, which is pretty nice. And it can cause weakness to all the enemies for 1 turn. Keep in mind that the AP cost is 5, as opposed to regular Cleave, which I believe is 4. But other than that, if you don't mind the high AP cost, I think this is definitely fantastic and something that you can get a lot of use for. So you should go ahead, pick this up, and pick up its upgrades. Next up is Spell Power. Range of skills is increased by 1 tile, and their weapon damage is increased by 10%. Plus, you get an additional level in Spellcraft. I definitely recommend you should go ahead and pick this up. Next is, again, another 15% to dodge. You can make your own decision about whether or not that makes sense for you. And then finally, Strong-Willed is going to give you a 30% mental debuff resist. I've mentioned several times before, I feel like you need at least 40 to 50% in mental debuff or physical debuff to actually see the difference. That obviously means that 30% is a huge buff for you. And if you combine it with a couple of the other options you had previously to increase your mental debuff resistance, you could definitely hit that 50% mark and make yourself significantly more sturdy against mental attacks. Whether or not that's actually worth it, up to you. Me personally, again, most of the time when I'm going to the back line, I'm either hitting archers or I'm hitting those off to the side by themselves melee units. And therefore, I don't get as much of those mental attacks for this type of character. And so I would say for him, it's not worth it. But your playstyle might be completely different, and so it might be worth it for you. And so now that we've went through all of the abilities, I think you can see there's a lot of versatility with how you could potentially use them. You could focus on hexes and combine it with Master of Hexes if you want to. You could put just those 2 points into these hexes to pick them up and get that Master of Hexes upgrade, and then just use the additional weapon damage to boost some of the weapon damage abilities that you already have. You can focus more so on teleport and range, just kind of darting around the battlefield and picking off targets. Whatever it is you want to do, this guy can kind of fill in that role for a Sage. I think it's an absolutely fantastic kit that a lot of people could take advantage of. Hope all of you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave me a like, share this content, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I will see you all in the next video. Take care.